Good morning, all you Suhai AP Bio students. Yes, rise and shine. It's a beautiful winter morning, -5 degrees in Sault Ste. Marie, and we have no time to waste, right? In this podcast series, we will take a quick tour around the cell and talk about their organelles, their functions, and the evolution of the two most important organelles, the mitochondria and chloroplasts. We're going to focus our attention mainly on eukaryotic cells in this podcast, and in particular, plant and animal cells, which you see here in the slide. Do you know which is which? You really should by now. So the one in the upper left-hand corner is the, yes, plant cell. You can tell by the cell wall, chloroplasts, big vacuole in the middle. And here is our animal cell with no cell wall, no chloroplasts. So you need to know the difference between those two. That should be pretty clear by now. So let's get started. Write in your notes that nearly all cells have three important functions. The first is to make proteins, which we've already studied, protein synthesis. And we know that proteins literally control every cell function, mostly as enzymes. Second function is to make energy, which happens in a process we'll soon be focusing on called cellular respiration. This produces energy stored in a familiar molecule. What's it called? Yes, ATP. That energy is used for growth and daily functions. And the last, and certainly not the least, is to make more cells for growth and repair. So make sure you've got all three of those basic functions in your notes, and let's move on. So let's focus on some of the more important organelles and their functions and get them in your notes. It's logical that cells need power, and we've talked about it a lot this year. We know that energy is stored in the magical ATP molecule. That energy is mostly used for four things you most likely already know, but let's get them back in your notes. So there's taking in and digesting food, taking in oxygen, making energy, and removing waste. Those are the four most important things that cells need power for. Just like organisms, cells need to digest food in order to use the energy in the food. Write in your notes that it's the lysosomes that break down larger food molecules and clean up old and broken down organelles in the cell. And that a lysosome's basic structure is a membrane filled with digestive enzymes. And you see some examples here on this slide. Also write that lysosomes are synthesized or made or put together by the rough endoplasmic reticulum, then transferred to the Golgi apparatus, and that they only appear in animal cells. Those three things are very important. So they're synthesized in the rough endoplasmic reticulum, or rough ER, transferred to the Golgi, where they're put together and become made functional, and that they only appear in animal cells. Plants do not have lysosomes. So write in your notes that animal cells also contain food vacuoles that use phagocytosis to bring food particles inside the cell, and that lysosomes then fuse with these food vacuoles in order to digest those food molecules. So you see the whole synthesis process in this picture. The rough ER synthesizes the lysosome. So here you see the rough ER. So it assembles all of the parts of the lysosome. Then it's passed to the Golgi apparatus that finishes off now this vacuole. The lysosome then fuses with the food vacuoles in order to digest its contents so it can be used by the cell. We call this process digestion. You can see now that the prefix lyso means to break things apart. In fact, we've used lysis before in this class. hydrolysis we used in this class. So that this prefix is also used as a suffix in some cells, but it still means breaking things apart. Now, you probably won't be surprised to know that diseases often occur that can cause problems. In the case of lysosomes, these problems are often fatal. Write in your notes that these diseases result in digestive enzymes inside the lysosomes that to stop working, and therefore these lysosomes fill up with undigested material such as food. What happens is these cells grow larger and larger as they fill with material until they no longer function and they begin to disrupt the surrounding organs. So there are over 40 such diseases we know of, but get in your notes that a familiar one is called Tay-Sachs disease. You see it right here, Tay-Sachs disease. Now this is an example, and in this case, this disease, undigested food builds up in the brain cells and begins to affect the brain function, and eventually can result in death if it's not treated. So kids are often treated immediately after they're born in their checkups and genetically worked up for Tay-Sachs disease because it needs to be treated right away. Now, what's interesting is that sometimes cells do need to die. So write in your notes that lysosomes can be used to kill cells when they're actually supposed to be destroyed, and that this process is referred to as apoptosis. You see the word right here, apoptosis. Write that some cells have to die for proper development in an organism and are replaced by newer, better functioning cells. Basically, cells wear out over time and need to be replaced. Also write that lysosomes break open and kill these cells and then digest them. This happens in human red blood cells on a regular basis. Now in this slide you see a couple more examples you may want to get in your notes as well. Where the tadpole's tail gets reabsorbed after it turns into a frog, and the webbing between your fingers is another example. That happens inside the mother's womb, and that webbing disappears during fetal development. So in multi-celled organisms like us, this programmed cell destruction is controlled by the cell nucleus during the cell cycle. Write in your notes that if that process gets interrupted somehow or damaged by a mutation of some kind, then this process can result in the uncontrolled growth of cells. We call that disease cancer. So in the case of cancer, the self-destruct mechanism gets overridden by a mutation and a tumor forms. And we all know that that's not good. So an interruption in this programmed destruction causes uncontrolled cell growth, and we call that cancer. Now let's move on to energy production. It makes sense that cells must convert incoming energy to forms they can use for work. Write in your notes that the two organelles most responsible for energy management are the mitochondria and the chloroplast, and that since plants are autotrophs, they have both of these organelles, and because animals are heterotrophs, they do not have chloroplasts, only mitochondria. That's an important distinction to make. Also write that mitochondria are responsible for converting glucose into energy during a process called cellular respiration, and that chloroplasts are the organelles plants use to convert sunlight into glucose in a process called photosynthesis. Both of these will be our next topics in this class, and will be a lab that we do at Lake Superior State University. Respiration and photosynthesis form many important cycles, not the least of which is the exchange of carbon dioxide and breathable oxygen in our atmosphere. So make sure you understand that. So let's look at these important organelles and some things they have in common and get them in your notes. First of all, we will soon see that both transform energy and generate ATP. Second, they both have double membranes on their outside. Next is that both of these organelles are semi-autonomous, meaning they can both move, change shape, and reproduce all on their own. Let me repeat that. These two organelles can move, change shape, and reproduce all on their own. So hold that thought because we're going to come back to it. Finally, both of these organelles have internal ribosomes, DNA, and enzymes. Let me repeat that. Both of these organelles have internal ribosomes, DNA, and enzymes. Let's see. They both have a double outside membrane and can move, change shape, and divide, and they have their own ribosomes, DNA, and enzymes. Okay, so once again, mitochondria function in a process called cellular respiration, where organic molecules like sugars, fats, and other fuels are broken down in the presence of oxygen. You should recognize this process as a catabolic reaction from our discussion of enzymes and their functions. They then use those broken down substances to generate energy in the form of ATP in a process called aerobic respiration. Now make sure you understand this basic process because we're going to get into a ton more detail about it. Let's look at the basic internal structure of the mitochondria and get some of these structures in your notes. First off, draw this bean-shaped diagram in your notes and label it correctly like you see it here. Again, you don't have to be perfect, just be able to recognize its shape and structure. So over here, I want you to get this diagram in your notes right here. It's important, and label it with all these structures. Just draw it like it is here. I know I would suck at it too, but I think I'd be able to, at least know what I'm drawing and know what I'm looking at in my notes. Now get in your notes that the mitochondria have two membranes, a smooth outer membrane and a highly folded inner membrane called the cristae. C-R-I-S-T-A-E. Here it is right here, cristae. Also write that there is a fluid-filled space between all these membranes called the mitochondrial matrix, which houses the mitochondrial DNA, ribosomes, and enzymes. So here you see now the mitochondrial DNA, okay, located in this matrix. Now, you may be asking why the mitochondria needs two membranes, right? Well, write in your notes that it needs two membranes to increase the surface area for membrane-bound enzymes that synthesize ATP. Also write in your notes that just like a normal cell membrane, mitochondria have a similar structure, meaning it's a phospholipid bilayer like you see here in this picture. Also write that the membrane has enzymes contained in it, just like a cell membrane does, and that in this case, the enzymes are involved in cellular respiration. You see the formula for this process here. Again, we'll be getting into that chemical process very shortly in our next unit. Okay, that's it for part one of our tour of the cell. So take a picture of those notes, submit them to Moodle, grab that study guide, answer the questions, and I'll see you in part two of our short tour of the cell. Bye.